Okay, welcome. Sorry for the late notice on the Zoom info, but it looks like people have it, so that's good. So this is the last, it's not really a class, it's more like a review session. So this is the last session before we go into the exam. And hopefully, I haven't actually gone through a grade book yet, but hopefully everyone's gotten all of their assignments and the recitation project in. If there's any open issues regarding any of that work, make sure you reach out to your TAs. You can CC me on it. And let's see what the situation is, and we'll deal with it on a case-by-case basis. But in general, everybody should have everything submitted by now, and we're just waiting to go into the finals on Wednesday. We do have a tight deadline to get everything graded, get everything submitted to Rutgers and whatnot. So if we have any open issues, just reach out to us and as soon as possible so we can try to resolve it. Once things go into the system, it's very hard for us to change it at that point. So I'm going to work with the TAs. We're going to try to grade the finals as soon as possible and get everything posted. I think I've mentioned this before, as part of the second chance policy, what I have to do is open up some extra entries into the Canvas calculation. And what that will do is it will lower everybody's grade average, right? So if you see that, don't freak out. It happens like every semester that we do this. It's necessary for us to be able to process the second chance policy properly. These extra entries will obviously create some empty scores into your grade calculation. And they're really just temporary, they're essentially temporary variables to allow us to calculate whether you scored better on exam 1 or part 1 of the final, and so on and so forth. So I'm actually going to flip that tonight. Once I flip that tonight, everyone will kind of see like their grade average look a little bit weird in Canvas. Don't worry about it. It will be fixed once we process the final exam, which will basically sort out the second chance policy. Okay. So I'm going to pause there for a second. Does anybody have any questions before I start going into some topics that came up to me in some of my office hours? Right. So to reiterate, what is the second chance policy? The second chance policy means that if you have whatever score you have on exam 1 and you have whatever score you have on exam 2, right? That means you did not skip exam 1 or exam 2. You actually did something. You showed up for exam 1 and exam 2. That score will be compared to their equivalent parts on the final exam. The final exam will be 3 parts. It will be part 1, which will match up to exam 1. Part 2, which will match up to exam 2. And then you'll have part 3, which essentially covers Excel and, the last couple of topics that we covered for the third part of the class. If you do better on part 1 of the exam than what you did on exam 1, then that score will apply to your exam 1. And likewise for exam 2, if your part 2 of your final exam is better than your exam 2, then that score will apply. Okay, so for example, if you have like exam 1, for the sake of argument, you got like a 30 on it or something. And if, part 1, which counts for 20, so what we do to normalize it is multiply it by 2.5, right? To make it up to like 50 or so. And then you compare. And if it's, let's say you got, after the normalization, it looks like 40 points, then your 40 is going to apply to exam 1. Okay, so that's what that means. Okay, so that's your second chance policy. Any other questions before I start going? Okay. Yeah, so do we need to take part 1, part 2, and part 3 in any order? No, so all 3 of them will be available at the same time, right? But the window to take them will not change, right? So on Monday, we're going to open everything up at 5 o'clock. This will be a 3-hour window for you to take your exam, right? Within that 3 hour, most people will probably take exam 1, 2, and 3, you know, parts 1, part 2, and part 3 in succession like that. But there's nothing to stop you from doing that. But they all will close at 8 o'clock, right? So it doesn't matter which order you take it in, but you know, they're all gonna have the same deadline, okay? And it's the same thing where once you answer the question, you can't go back, right? So it's the same type of thing, okay? So the assignment should be graded by the time the exams kick off. I mean, I'm pressing the TAs to try to grade them as soon as possible, okay? So hopefully we can get it done sooner than that. If there's any particular questions related to those assignments, just go ahead and ask them now. It doesn't matter whether the assignment got graded yet, okay? All right, any other questions before I start moving here? Okay, all right, so I thought, so over here, there's a couple of things that came up on the JavaScript, okay? And, you know, before I do that, I'll just kind of mention the bit on the Excel, right? So let me, okay, let me step back for a second. So part 1, that what we covered, you remember what we covered for part 1 was sort of like computer history, web searching, Venn diagrams, and the numeric conversions, right? So the numeric conversions, you had, you know, the mechanicals, right? How to go from like decimal to binary to hex and vice versa. You can kind of go in any of those combinations, right? So once you got that down, it's a matter of like, you know, knowing from the book, like the various facts and stuff like that. So that's really part 1. And then part 2 is essentially about JavaScript. I mean, there's a bit about flowcharts, there's a bit about pseudocode, right? But it's really heavily weighted towards the JavaScript side of things. That's part 2. And then part 3 is Excel. And then a little bit more of like book stuff, like whether you're looking at the security, like privacy, and, you know, encryption, decryption, security, and whatnot. So that's essentially like the 3 sections there, okay? So, you know, when you think about it for the Excel, you know, I think probably you can imagine like, we obviously are not gonna give you like an Excel spreadsheet and for you to kind of do stuff from scratch. It'll be more like sort of like the JavaScript will give you pieces of code and you'll kind of like maybe trace your way through it. You remember on the HTML for the exam, we might give you like a page and say, okay, what's the HTML you would use to create this page? Something along those lines, right? Or that table, right? A table is a very common topic that you should expect to see for your HTML. So likewise, you can imagine for the Excel, you could see something like, okay, here's a VLOOKUP, right? You remember the example we did for the VLOOKUP in terms of like the broker commission or the pizza discount calculation. And they'll kind of play with a couple of different things on the VLOOKUP and kind of say, okay, if this value is passed into the VLOOKUP, what's the VLOOKUP going to return, right? Likewise on the JavaScript, you know, here's a for loop, here's an array, here's some values going in, you know, what's the value coming out of this function, let's say. So it's kind of like what you call code tracing and whatnot. You know, there'll be different types of formulas that you can have, like I'm referencing cell A1 that has this value, right? And maybe I'm doing addition, maybe I'm doing concatenation and whatnot. So what does the value look like? And you notice here for the JavaScript, one thing I kind of put in here that some people had some question was concatenating numbers and strings, okay? So I'm just trying to lay it out. You probably saw a little bit of that with exam 2 in terms of tracing the code. You'll kind of see something similar for their equivalents within Excel, right? So you remember your Boolean operators, right? We talked about Boolean operators with the and, or, and nor. You actually had the 3 equivalents of that. You have that for your web searching. You remember the web searching where you have like, you know, tiger and baseball, or not animal, or something like that, right? So, and you remember how that translates into your Venn diagram, okay? So you have the same thing when you look at your assignment, when you did the JavaScript, right? So it was like, you know, if the destination equals to Bellagio, right? And remember, it's the comparison, right? So it's a double equals. It's the Bellagio, and you picked like the high roller tour, right? So it's the ampersand sign, right? The double ampersand sign specifically, right? For your and. If it was an or, you would have like the double vertical pipes, right? And by the same token, when you're doing like your Boolean for Excel, the equivalent, they actually have like that function, right? So as part of your conditional formatting, you did the equals and, right? Then open paren, you had your range, and then you had your criteria, right? Comma, and then whatever other criteria that you wanted to use. So it's like multiple criteria. I shouldn't say range. It would go equal and then your criteria, comma, criteria 2, comma, criteria 3, however many criteria you wanted to have. Okay, so whether you're looking at your web searches, or you're looking at JavaScript, or you're looking at Excel, there's equivalents in terms of like these Booleans, right? Which would be and, or, and nor. Okay. And like I said, concatenation, right? And I'll kind of go through some of the concatenation again for JavaScript. And remember, I think I posted out the announcement for Excel, the concatenation. There actually is a concat function, but you also can use the ampersand sign for your concatenation in Excel. Okay. So let me move forward here. But if there's other things that spring to your mind, just send them over to me. These are the ones that just kind of came to me during my office hours, you know, on Friday. Okay. All right. So concatenation of numbers and strings. So let's just kind of do that. Let's see what happens, right? So let's say var, I don't know, string item equals to ABC, and then var item 2 equals to EF, and then var num item equals to 1, 2, 3. Okay, and so, you know, what does concatenation look like for JavaScript? Well, that looks like doing a plus sign, right? So you're doing an addition. Actually, I should create a num item 2 here. Okay, and I guess since we're using document write, let's do document write then. Document write, and let me see. Let's do string plus, and then plus string item plus string item 2. Let's see here, plus, let's do a BR. And, okay, so let me take that, paste it down. Let's do string 2, and let's see what happens when we do that. And I want to confuse people with this plus sign, so I just say is. And item 2. Okay, so this kind of puts in different combinations where we have 2 strings that we're doing concatenation. We're doing a string and a number, and then we're doing 2 numbers. All right, let's see what that looks like. Okay, so you can see what happened here. I put 2 strings together. I put the plus sign that actually puts them together. And likewise, actually, the string is with the plus right here is actually doing concatenation already. Okay, so you have this is concatenated to this, is concatenated to that, right? So in JavaScript, when you're doing a plus sign, that's like concatenating multiple strings together. Okay, now when you're here, you can see in this case, I have 1 string and 1 number. Okay, well, so what did that do? Well, it doesn't really make any sense to do any sort of mathematic operation on a string plus a number. So it's going to treat the number essentially as a string, right? So you basically are concatenating this to this, and you get that. Okay. Now here, it's interesting. You have the num item and num item 2. So it actually concatenate them, which is interesting. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a number like that. Like so. Okay. Let me see. See if that changes at all here. Here we go. All right. So because I had the, the string at the beginning part of it, I'm adding it to the number, which was kind of the same case as this one, where I had a string plus a number here. Okay, so doing it like this, basically, it really treats it as a number, and then it became 246. Now let me take out the number. Should be able to do the same thing here. Yeah, okay. So doing it like this, it knows that as a number, it treats it as a number, right? Because I actually defined it here. Now, if I inputted this as a text box and I put it in there, that's where I need to remember to put in a number. Okay, when I do the declaration and initialization here, it knows it's a number, right? Because otherwise, if it was a string, I would have put these quotes in here, right? So for example, if I did this, I put quotes here like that, then you get the same thing as before, where it sees like a string and a number. It's not going to add them together, right? It just will know to concatenate them. Okay, so once I declare and initialize it without this double quotes, then it knows it's a number. That's why it would add them as 246, like that. Okay, now like if I was looking at this as a text box, if I input the value in a text box, it's going to look at it as a string. Okay, and that's why you remember from the assignment, you guys were putting in the numbers to make it be treated as a number when you're inputting a number from the text box. Okay. All right, so let me see here. So that's concatenating numbers and strings. Okay. So what do we do with the array? Okay. So let me do an array. Var new, well, let's say var cars equals to say 4, like that. Okay. Let me initialize it, car1, 2, 3, 4, like that. And let's just write this out here. So, okay, so you can see that's the array. We've initialized it at car 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, now it's very common that we're going to process it with some sort of loop here. Okay, so let me build this up. Let's just do a write here. Let me leave the document write I here, and then let's do a write cars I am plus ER, like so, with the quotes. So, and need to start off with 0 because this is an array, right? And that's fine. We start off from 0 and we keep on going up plus 1. And then we do this. We could just, say that it's less than 4, right? So it starts from 0 to 3. So that's your 4 items there. We could just put 4 in here. But the other thing we can do is just look at the length of the array. Okay, so just remember car. I think everyone knows what that should be, right? Length, like so, right? So this is a very generic way to look at how we process the array. Okay, the for loop going through using cars.length is a very common way. Initialize it at 0 and then I equals to I plus 1. Okay, so this is a very standard generic way of processing any size array, right? You don't care later on, I might change the size of this. I might make this 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 20, 100, whatever. I won't have to change this for loop. This for loop will always stay the same. Okay, so let's run this. And so you can see this first part here is the I equals to 0 the first time through, 2, 3. Okay, and then car 1, 2, 3, 4, which is each element of the array here. Okay, so I can almost guarantee you're going to get a question on how to process an array, right, with the for loop. Okay, and at a minimum, you're going to have some sort of for loop where you'll say, what's the value, right? And this one, I equals to 0, and then whatever, however many loops you want to go through, and I equals to I plus 1 is a standard one. But you remember, I can do whatever things I want. I can make it I equals to I plus 2, right? I can go minus, right? If I start at a high number here, let's say I said I equals to 10, right? So any of those variation, and then, after it comes out here, we might ask you, what's the value of I? Well, actually, probably better would be, what will be the value of I in here after like 5 times? Well, this time we only went through 4 times. So let's say after like 2 times, what would be the 3rd time? What would it print here, right? So in this case, here's after it went through 2 times, the 3rd time coming through, the value of I would equal to 2. Okay, so that's what I mean by kind of like tracing the variable. The other thing about tracing the variable, which I went over in the last review session, was talking about global variable versus local variable. So that's really important, right? So if you look at, these variables here, and then also you went into a function, right? Function 1, 2, 3, and then you declared a variable in there, right? So if I did function, don't look at this as a real function, right? But like, fun 1, 2, 3 or something like that. And I did a variable in here, like this, and then I did a variable, let's say num item to 789. Right, and if I do a right here versus a right here, you should know like which variables in scope and what that value should be. Okay. And you remember when I'm running this, this function only executes when I call the function, right? So later on, I'll probably do something like fun 1, 2, 3, like that. Okay, and then what's the value? Okay, so that's like the variable scoping, which I covered for the last review session. And then the last bit was the assignment versus comparison again. Okay, I think I mentioned it a couple of times, and the reason why I mentioned it is because I still see there's people having some problems with this where they're doing if statements and they're still using one equal sign. And the one equal sign in the if statement is just not going to give you the results that you want. Okay, so you really need to remember that. So anytime you do a comparison, where's a comparison here, right? So this is a comparison right here when I use the less than sign, right? You know, the less than sign doesn't really confuse people, right? Because it's either less than or greater than, right? It's really when you're looking for the equals that people kind of mix that up. So let's see. So if cars equals car 2, and then like so, so you have the car 2 printed here. Okay. If I change this, what happens? Now all of a sudden my whole array became car 2 because I used the equal sign. I've actually assigned car 2 to every single element in the array 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, because I used a single equal sign here. Okay, versus the double equal sign. Just for kicks, let me do the document write of cars again right after this for loop is done. See what that looks like. Okay, so you see before the array looked like car 1, car 2, car 3, car 4. Once I did the equal sign in here, single equal, I've actually not only made it true every single time, but I've also changed the values of the array so it looks like car 2 all the way through. Okay, and that's not really what you want, right? So what you really want is the car equal here. And then let me just comment this out here. Right, so now I only printed out with car 2, plus I left the values of the array intact, right? I did not change the value of the array. It still stays as car 1, car 2, car 3, car 4. Okay. So I know some of these points I'm making is somewhat repetitive, but for sure, I know you saw this on exam 2, and I'm telling you, you're going to see it again for exam 3. Okay, so that's why I'm kind of harping on these points because I still see people getting them wrong. So hopefully you want to make sure you drill this into your head so that you can make sure that you get it right for the final exam on Wednesday. Okay. All right. So these are the main points that I saw coming up. I didn't actually get any other emails from people about any other areas that they had questions or challenges with. You know, I know some people brought up some stuff for assignment 5 related to the concatenation and whatnot. So I put out the announcement for that. Where was that announcement here? Okay. So there was the ampersand sign here. Remember, when you're doing like a cell reference, so let's say I'm referring to C5, If you put the whole thing inside of quotes, Excel is going to treat the whole thing to be a string. So that's why what you have to do is you treat this operator, you append this or concatenate this to the cell reference, right? And that's how Excel will, it's just the way how Excel will understand that you're trying to do, like in this case, a greater than sign, than whatever is inside of C5, okay? And likewise, for the wildcard, which was part of the assignment, you would have the star, which is the wildcard for Excel, and you would have the ampersand sign, you would have the cell reference, and then you have another ampersand sign, concatenate, and you would have the wildcard afterwards. So this is how you can say, I will take whatever the string is. Let's say the example I think I might have given in the to some people is like California, right? CALIF. You can put like the star before and the star after. So anything with the string CALIF would get picked up, right? So if you were to say, how can I look for a wildcard in Excel, both before and after a set of strings, a string, I should say, this is what you would do, okay? The cell reference should not be inside of quotes, okay? Just to kind of make that clear. Not really going to affect you on the assignment, because frankly, at the assignment, we're not going to actually ask you to go type in this conditional formatting. What we might show you is something like this, where you'll see the and then you'll see like the A1 less than 500 and G1 greater than 2, right? So here's the Boolean, right? The Boolean would be to say both of these criteria are true. If that evaluates to true, then you can do whatever you want here. In this case, you're making the background to be yellow, okay? But like this whole thing where it's a little bit different. I kind of found out when I was talking to some students over the weekend, where there was some people using MacBook versus using a PC, and how you got to this formula to determine which cells to format is a little bit different between the MacBook, between the Mac and versus a regular PC. Kind of doesn't matter at this point for the final exam. We're not going to have you do that on the computer. But you could see something like this, right? So we'll have a rule and we'll say within the rule, what does this mean, right? And you just kind of put in plain English. You'll kind of say, yeah, what this is looking for is like anything that's in this column, you know, is less than 500, and this column is greater than 2, okay? And if those criteria are true, both true, I should say, both true, which is with the and, then you're going to be setting the background to be yellow for for your cell, okay? So I think that's something that you can imagine would come up in your Excel section for the final exam, okay? I hope that made sense to people there. I think there was another aspect that people had some issues with was percentages. Remember, when you apply the percentages in Excel, you see a number. Let's say you see 85%. The number is actually 0.85, right? So in the actual cell itself, you know, the fact that it shows 85%, that's really a formatting thing from Excel. Excel is just showing it to you because people like to see things like 85%. They don't like to see like 0.85, let's say. So when you see the 85%, you shouldn't be looking at it as a whole like 85, right? You should be looking at it as 0.85. So, you know, I think we had some situations where the number became ginormous because people were treating it as like a like as a regular 85, let's say, as opposed to 0.85. So you can also remember that. What does it mean when I say percentage for formatting in Excel? Okay. So with that, those were the JavaScript questions that came up. I'm going to open it up. Would people find it useful if I covered the Excel for, like, let's say the VLOOKUP, the absolute and relative cell reference, and the pivot table, or everyone's kind of got that down? Well, if there's other topics you want me to cover, I can certainly cover those things too. So I'm opening it up to everyone here. What would you rather see me do? do the Excel stuff, like with those things I mentioned, or you want to cover something else? All right, I got a vote for Excel. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go with Excel then. And like I said, so what I want to cover for Excel would be, again, like absolute and relative cell reference, the VLOOKUP stuff, and the pivot table. Okay. So let me, I'll just mention it in passing, people remember like what are the different recommended ways to use a chart in Excel, right? So one thing you might see is there might be a question that might say, oh, here's like a given set of data. What do you think the recommended chart would be? Right. So you remember what is the recommended chart when we do when we see data that kind of will add up to, let's say, 100, right? It's essentially going to be a pie chart, right? That'll be a recommendation for that, right? If you have a series of data with some values next to it, chances are that's going to be like a column chart, right? So stuff like that, that's probably fair game that you should try to make sure you remember those type of concepts there. Okay, so anyway, let me switch over to the Excel sheet then. Okay. I think I have to shut off this one. And then let me do the share again on Excel. All right. So I think everybody can see this, right? Good. All right. So let me just whip up some data here. Look, quantity, price, so let's say this store, let's say, well, actually, while I'm here, maybe I'll do like a little bit demonstration, copy that down, something like that. Pull that down. And let's say, else, let's see. Let's see. Okay. All right. So let me see. I should put some taxes in here, maybe. So let's do tax. Okay. So I'll do bold here. Take this. Guess I should make this bigger. So let me do a view, zoom. Okay. Let's make this bold also. Let's make this dollars here. And let's say the tax equals to 0.07. I'll make this into a percentage. Need to be more exact. That. All right. So let's see. Let's figure out what the tax on this might be. Okay. Equals to, well, let's do this one first. Let's do equals to F2 times G2. Okay, so it's 1035. So that's fine. So let's go back to here. I don't really need to put parentheses around here, but I'm just kind of do it because it helps me kind of think about this in a logical grouping. Let's multiply by tax. Okay, so now I got, you know, that's how much tax it would be, right? But I want to copy this down. So what do we think is going to happen here? Well, that's what's going to happen. And so why is that? It's because part of the default logic for Excel would be to take this M1 and make it M2 and M3 and so on and so forth, right? But we actually don't want that to happen. So that's part of the distinction between absolute and relative cell reference. So on these like F10, G10, like we want those to change, right? You can see it's going, changing like that. So what do we have to do to make it so that we always will multiply with with M1? Okay, and that's where we have to put the dollar signs in here, right? So when I put a dollar in here, that locks the M. That means if I go left or right in my copying, it will never change that. And likewise, when I put a dollar in front of the one will never change. So I don't really need to put the dollar in front of the M, but I'm going to anyway. It doesn't really hurt anything for me to do that, given the use case that we're looking at here. So you can still see it's 0.77, which is fine, right? Now let's see what happens when I copy this down. And you can see it stays M1 all the way through. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to everyone, right? So what's the total here? So it equals to this times this plus the tax, right? Just like so, okay? And then I can drag it down and we're all good here, okay? All right, so that's a concept with absolute and relative cell reference here, okay? So let me take a look at how we can look at this as a pivot, okay? Now I'm going to just mention in passing, and you know, we can go into it if people have trouble still. Remember when you look at the tables, and on the MacBook, I believe you just have the one table here, and then you can like select down on it. But here on the PC, it breaks it out. You have pivot table, you have table here. You remember, I would select one of these, and then I would do the Excel. I mean, not the Excel, the table, and then you know from there you can do like a right mouse, and you can add like a total row at the bottom, and then you can do things essentially like subtotals, right? And you remember the key thing there you have to remember is that the totals here will factor in like the values that you filter out versus the standard sum for Excel it will not. It will just look at everything. So for the sake of argument, if I did a sum on this price, or actually I should sum on this total here, it will sum every single thing. It doesn't matter that you filter out the values here. Okay. And the other thing you should know is, let's say I did this and I go to data here and I did this filter here. Some people ask me if that was the same thing. In some ways it is, but in some ways it's not, right? So that in some ways where I can get a filter here, that's fine, right? Especially I have like these header values here, and then I can just like select on these here, right? But you know, I don't have the same type of thing that I get with the table where I can put the subtotal at the bottom here, okay? So I can take this filter off, and then I can do the insert, and then I can do a table here, okay? But since I covered the table, I think in the last review session on past Wednesday, I'll leave it unless people, you know, still have more questions on that. So I'm going to go into the pivot table here. Okay. And so you can see like all of these values here. Okay. And, you know, let's say I want to show the stores. Right, and nicely it kind of stuck it into rows. I know for some people it was sticking everything into here, which, you know, you can just drag it around between these things here. Okay, so in this case it was nice. It put it into rows for me, which is what I wanted. And I want to have the book, right? And I think the reason why it kind of put in here, because it doesn't really make any sense to do summation on strings, which is what store and book are, right? And then you have like your sum of quantity. Yeah, let's do it on the quantity here. That should be okay. And I'll do on total here. Okay. I guess the only commonality I can do a filter on is maybe on the store. Okay, so you remember here, I only put two values. I only put Clifton and Montvale, like so. So let me like just get all the books from Clifton. And there you go. It shows that. And I'm showing all of the books and all of the total here for those. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone in terms of a pivot. You can drag this around. I mean, it's a simple table, so it's not much I can do with it. The only thing that made sense to filter on was the store. And then the columns is really only the number of books, I guess, right? So yeah, I probably should have added like more of a table so I can actually sum some real stuff together, but there wasn't that much to really sum together. I only had a few things in there, but you know, here, like so, that kind of just flips it around on the filter here. Okay, so hopefully that kind of gives you an idea how to play around with the pivot tables. If I come back to here, let's say do it like this. Let's see what happens if I want to do a chart here. So if I want to do a chart, right? So again, you remember the general rule or rule of thumb is when you look at like something plus a quantity, I shouldn't say quantity, I'll put a number next to it, then you're tending to have something like this, right? And ideally, the numbers, the quantities in this case, is not vastly different from each other. So you can see like they number anywhere from 1 to 5. So you can kind of get like something nice here. If any one of the numbers are an extreme number, it's really going to screw up your chart. So let's go with this. And there you have some charts here. Okay. And, you know, like I said before, I'm not going to make something up to do a pie chart, but remember the guidance for a pie chart is basically like summing up to like around to 100, and then you can make a pie chart. That will be the rule of thumb there. Are we going to have to do the Excel portion on Excel? No. So what's going to happen is like we'll have like some like a screen that will tell you like this is what you see in Excel, what's happening. Okay, so it's almost like a picture where you'll see like what does the Excel sheet look like, right? So I might show you like, you know, carbs, you know, fat or whatever, right? Sugar. It'll be like 25, 25, and 50. And then it'll kind of be like this and say, okay, if I had to do a chart from this, what would the chart look like? Something like that, right? Or what would be the recommended chart or whatever, something like that. So that would be that. Yeah. So let me set up a very simple table to do the VLOOKUP. So let's say we're gonna maybe calculate a discount. Oh, actually, that'll be interesting. So you know what will happen here? Because I use the absolute reference, I'm gonna break something when I do this. So let me clear this out. Actually, no, I don't want to do that. I want to clear the content. So let's see what happens when I want to try to put a discount in here. So I'm going to do the insert here. And interesting. Okay. So interesting enough, it actually did adjust this, even though I had this in here. So Excel was smart enough to recognize that I inserted the column. It would have been different if I did a copy of that column. If I did a copy of this and then I tried to copy it over to here, which let's say for the sake of argument, I copied this here. It's going to lock in the N1 here, right? So let me paste this here, and you can see the N1 got locked in here. Okay. So, but obviously like these are relative cell reference. So this is not correct. Okay. So you can't multiply E, which is a string, right, times this. So everything got moved over. So that's why this became like this, this value, like bad value or something, right? So I'm going to use this to calculate a discount. Okay. I'm not going to adjust the tax calculation. I'm just going to have to discount here. So I'm going to say book quantity, and then I'll say whatever the discount is going to be. So let's say I order just one book. Well, then I'm going to say there's going to be no discount, right? And let's say I order 3 books. I'm going to have like, I don't know, 10% discount. And let's say 5 books that have maybe a 15% discount. And then I'm going to make this, and then I better make some value to be like 6 or so. Okay. All right. So what does this look like here? Well, this is going to be a VLOOKUP, right? A VLOOKUP means that to make this discount calculation happen, you're going to look against this table here, right? Actually, technically, it's more like this, right? So let's do this. Let's do the VLOOKUP. Okay, and so Excel already shows you already. I don't even have to fill out the whole thing. It already shows you the VLOOKUP. Okay, so the lookup value, what is the lookup value? Well, in this case, it's this, right? It's F2, how many quantity I'm getting. Okay, and then What's the next thing? It's going to be a table array, which is this. Okay. And then what column am I looking at? Well, I'm looking at this one, which will be the second column. And then is this approximate match and exact match? Okay, so again, this is like a kind of an important thing, right? In this case, because we're looking at a range of stuff, right? So I'm not going to fill out every example here. So I'm not going to put in like book quantity 1, book quantity 2, book quantity 3, book quantity 4, and so on and so forth, right? I essentially created a range. So I'm creating a range from 1 to 3, 3 to 5. So I'm creating these buckets here. So when you have that, and they're based on numbers, then you probably want to use approximate match, okay? And there's going to be probably a couple questions like this for the exam too, where you might say, for me to set up a VLOOKUP table, what's the criteria? Okay, so a VLOOKUP table, in this case, I kind of just did it like very quickly, and it's kind of naturally like that. The values have to be sorted, right? So if I did it the other way around, let's say I did like, let's say 153, your VLOOKUP's not going to work, right? So there's certain criteria on your data to be in a certain state for you to do things with it. In this case, the VLOOKUP, your data has to be sorted, right? As an example, right? So try to understand that concept too. All right, but anyway, Excel will default this to be true, but I'm going to explicitly click on this to be true, to say approximate match. Okay, and done. Okay, all right, well, okay, so let's just do a taste test. You can see, well, we ordered 3 books, and then we got a 10% discount. I'm going to change this to be percentage, right? Okay, now going back to absolute and relative cell reference, you can imagine if I just take this right now, the way I just typed it in, this is not going to work. And so let's see what happens when I drag this down. You can see it doesn't work. And why is that? Because you can see like everything. When I mean everything, I mean not only this moved down, but the table reference moved down. You can see it's N9011 and whatnot. It's just going all the way down here. That's not what you want, right? So what do we need to do to lock this in or make it absolute cell reference? You need to put in dollars here. So you put in $1 here, $1 here, which is the beginning of the range, right? I think probably did this enough. You probably know this right now. Like this is your beginning of the range, and then this is the end of the range, right? Here. Right now you've locked it in, right? Because you've locked in the beginning part, you've locked in the end part with these dollar signs. Now let's copy that down. And there you go. Right. So let me just pick one. I put in this 6 over here, right? And so it went past the range. There is no 6 here, right? It just went off the end of the table here. And so it knows, Excel knows to go back to 5 and apply a 15% discount, which is what happened here, right? For this case here, where it was a 2, there's no 2 on this table, right? And it knows to go back to the last record. It doesn't really know it's a record, but from our perspective, it's a record. It knows to go back here and apply 0% discount. Okay, now let's see what happens if I change this, and I actually did switch this to be an exact match. Let's see what happens. Okay. So this one is fine, right? Because I found a 3, which is fine, right? But let's make this go for everything else. Okay. I'll drag it down, and you can see some things busted, right? So what busted? Anything that is not in the table, right? So you have this wasn't in the table, this wasn't in the table, it became NA because it didn't find an exact match, right? So that's why you should be using approximate match in this case, in this scenario. Okay, and let's fix this back and pull it down. And we're back to working VLOOKUP here. Okay. didn't cover this too much, but let's do like equals to if error. Okay, so it's kind of similar to like your other if statement where you kind of have something, in this case, an error. If that came back, what's it going to print out, right? In the other case where you have like just a standard if, it will be like, oh, if it's true, then you're going to, display one value. If it's false, display another value. In this case, you only care about one thing. Did it find if there's an error, right? So let's say I go back to my discount and I screw that up. I come back with an error. Then I might say something like, I don't know, error V, like this. Okay. So like this, and let me change this back to where it's going to generate an error again. Make it false. Let me copy this down like so. Okay, so you can see when there's an error, you can kind of maybe print out like sort of like a helpful message or whatever. Maybe a little bit more useful than saying NA, right? So when you say this kind of comes back, you say, okay, it's an error, right? You can imagine I can do something like, VLOOKUP, and it could be talking about like, which cell is broken or something like that, right? It's just more informative way of showing that there's an error, and then making it so that when you see the error, you can maybe troubleshoot it a little bit faster. Okay. All right, so that's VLOOKUP. Like I talked about before, we had the pivot table, and then we have a couple of different things in terms of the absolute and relative cell reference. I guess while I'm here, maybe I can do the and, right? So let me do the if. Well, so this is like if error. Let's do like just a standard if here. Okay. So equals if. So what's my logical test here? Trying to think. Well, let's just do one thing here. Let's say if it's say greater than 2, low. Okay. All right, so let me take it down to here, like that. Now let me do the and equals and what's the true criteria that I want? I guess I want to check if it's greater than 2 and maybe G2 greater than 3, 2. So, okay, and then I'll copy that down. So, yeah, this is fine here, right? So this is like an if statement incorporating an and in here. I mean, it could just be just as easy in this case, just a or also, or will work fine too. Okay, cool. So I think that covers like the conditionals, the if statements. In this case, we also had an if error, the absolute relative. We have the VLOOKUP. We have some chart. We have the pivot table. So I think those are the major things. We have the table, subtotal, the sum. Yeah. So any other questions on this or on the JavaScript, or actually really just anything within the class? Okay. So look, this is just an open session. If there's anything that maybe comes to your mind a little bit later, feel free to send me an email. Yeah, so flow charts. So I guess the main thing with flow charts, let me get out this Excel and see if I can open up a draw program. Okay. All right. So let's pop over to the flow charts. Share screen. Where's my flow chart drawing program? Here we go. Okay, so here, I guess it actually comes with a default flow chart. You can't really tell here. Let me see if I can make this bigger. You can't really tell that much, but you can pretty much say this is like a rectangle, even though there's like a little bit of a curve action here, right? So the main points here is like, you have these like these rectangles that are doing processing. You have like these diamonds that are making decisions, and make sure like your decisions are only having two choices coming out, one coming in, essentially like this, right? And then you have to remember your parallelograms. Do we have a parallelogram here? Find a parallelogram in here somewhere. Oh, yeah, there we go. Good call. All right, so we got a parallelogram. Okay, so parallelogram is your inputs and outputs, right? So just remember, like, your like display to the screen, typing in for your keyboard. Like, you remember the password example where, basically Facebook login, you have like the password you type in, that's your input, right? So anything that's going into the computer or out of the computer, whether it's like display to a monitor, input on the keyboard, click on the mouse or whatever, that's considered input and output, right? So make sure you're doing that, and then you're doing some processing, right? This is saying lamp doesn't work. I don't know if I would kind of look at it that way. You're kind of saying like turn on lamp, I would say, right? And then the fact you're going to observe that it's not working, right? So this is like a general flow chart type of thing. I'm trying to look at it from a computer programming flow perspective, right? So this is more of like a human algorithm, I guess, or human flow chart flow, right? So let's say, the action here is to turn on lamp, right? And, before you get to the part where you have, is the lamp plugged in, you're basically going to have a check to say, is the lamp, is the light bulb from the lamp like turning on, right? So if the light bulb fails to turn on, then you go through this troubleshooting process, right? So in this case, is the lamp plugged in? Is the bulb burned out? And then you would have something, let's say in this case, to go repair the lamp, okay? So I'm just kind of taking what they've provided as this example when I came into the draw.io. But don't forget when you're doing this, like from a computer perspective, like whatever you're passing in as your data, maybe you went to the hard disk or your memory or whatever to pull the information, that's part of your IO. And so you want to remember that you have a parallelogram in there, right? Then you have various actions. Any type of action is going to be in this like rectangle shape. Okay, forget about these little curved things in there that looks pretty much like a rectangle, right? And don't forget you have a start and an end. So that's where these oval shapes come in. Okay, so you would have an oval shape at the top here, and you would have like an oval shape at the bottom here for start and end. So start and end, you would have your parallelogram probably to do your input here, and then you would probably have another parallelogram down here at the bottom to display your output. Okay, so that's a flowchart perspective. So just try to stick to these rules, and I think you should be okay, right? So think in terms of the flowchart. What are your inputs? What are your outputs? What are the actions you're doing? What are the questions or the decisions that need to be made? If you can answer all of those different types of things, then you should be able to fit it into like the parallelogram, the rectangles, and the diamonds. Okay. So I hope that makes sense to everyone there. Any other questions? Okay. So like I said, I'm leaving it open. You can send me an email and I'll respond to you on whatever you need me to cover between now and the exam. We're going to open the proctoring, same as for the first two exams at 5 o'clock. I know some people might have some bandwidth issues or not, but try to sign in onto the Zoom. So I'll be hosting the Zoom on my side, and then just kind of display. Make sure you put your name, your proper name on there, so I can take your attendance. And then the two TAs, Monica and Guang, will also host their WebEx on their normal lab out office hours. So I believe Guang likes to do his on Zoom and Monica does hers on WebEx. So either one of them, if there's any questions, let us know right away. You have a problem on your upload or some connectivity issue or whatever, like just let us know right away so we can log it and we can maybe try and do something. Okay. So the exam will just open up just like the first two exams, right, on Canvas, right? It'll just become available to everyone on Wednesday at 5 o'clock. Okay. I will send out the announcement for the Zoom that you can dial into, so I can log you for the exam. And for the two TAs that will also be helping the proctor, they'll answer questions. If you go on the campus where they host their normal office hours, you can just click on that, and that will bring you to their rooms that you can like let them know if there's any problems that you're experiencing. Okay, cool. All right, anyway, good luck with the exam. You know, I really want all of you to do well. A lot of you are doing well in the class, so let's finish up strong. Do let me know right away if there's any questions you have as you're studying, and I'll try to you know, answer as quickly as I can. Okay. All right. With that, it's been great having you for this semester. If you have a chance, do try to fill out those the questionnaires. We use that to try to adjust the class for the following semester. So if you can provide us feedback, what goes well, what's not going as well, you know, we appreciate that feedback. Okay. So thank you, everyone, and good luck for your exam on Wednesday. Okay.
Thank you. Take
All right.
care.
All right. See you.